Yep.
Oh, hey, Jay.
What's up?
Yeah, sorry. I always have some trouble figuring out how to connect, so that's my bad. Yeah, so we spoke last week. Just had a good conversation. Honestly, you might have to boot me because I could talk to you all night. But
Okay, so do you have a one topic or issue or question, or what do you want to get to?
yeah, I sort of would like to continue our discussion on ecumenism, maybe, and I'm also I'm ignorant as to the ecclesiology of the finer points of the ecclesiology of the
Okay, so
Orthodox Church.
what's the question of the topic? Get to it. I'm not trying to be mean. It's just there's like 20 people I want to get
Yeah,
to.
yeah, no, absolutely. Um, so I would imagine that you're familiar with what's it called, the Commission for the Commission of Joint Dialogue between for theological dialogue between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. I'm probably butchering the acronym there.
Are you talking about the Alexandria document?
No, they've had a number of plenary sessions. The one I wanted to bring up tonight was, I believe, the 10th plenary session, which took place in Ravenna, Italy, in 2007, I believe.
Yeah, like I've heard of the Ravenna document, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Well, what I recall is more recently the Chieti document and the Alexandria document because they're fresh in my head. But
Right,
so
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, so the Joint Commission for Theological Dialogue between between the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. That's what it's called.
Okay.
So they've been meeting in plenary sessions and so forth.
Yeah.
So like I said last week, we were discussing ecclesiology and maybe the magisterial weight of this ecumenism. I brought up the statement by Athenagoras, and you clarified your view on that. So when it comes to this joint commission, I imagine you might say similar things about it regarding infiltration by the CIA and so forth. Maybe we could just start there. If you have an opinion on the joint commission and what its motives are in your view.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked for many years, written articles for many years, explaining in depth what I think about ecumenism as a geopolitical strategy and project. Doesn't mean that I can't read the Alexandria document, which was produced by the commission that you're talking about, and see where the arguments are good, where the arguments are bad. None of that changes that it's still a geopolitically motivated operation. But what does it have to do with? So again, like what? Two different questions. So there's the geopolitical side of it, and then there's the question of which theology is correct and which one's right.
Well, let's not focus too much on the geopolitics unless you want to. I would just want you. I would want to know if you think that is there any legitimate progress being made in this joint commission? Is it for you as an Orthodox person? Is it at all significant?
So I did a whole 2-hour live stream, which I linked to you last time about the Alexandria document. And I said explicitly where I thought it was admitting good points, what the apologetic use of that was, which was to say that therefore Vatican I is not true.
Right. And I apologize, Jay.
You don't have to apologize. It's just like this is the same stuff we talked about last time. So what's the? I'm not trying to be mean to you, but understand we've already had a bunch of trolls. So I'm trying to calm down because I'm in like combating the troll mode. I know you're not a troll, but I'm just saying. So this was what we talked about last time. My replies haven't changed since last time.
No, so that's why I wanted to get more into the specific issues of the Joint Commission. And the Ravenna statement. So maybe I'll just go to one of the something they agreed in the Ravenna statement in 2010. It's my understanding that they agreed at I think all of the Orthodox churches sent delegates except for one.
I doubt that. All of the Orthodox churches.
I think that was the statement, at least from Callistos Ware, was that all of the
okay. Well, he's not the most reliable person, so.
Right. Maybe they didn't all have delegations. He said there was only one of the autocephalous churches that didn't send a delegation.
Okay, well that's not all. So.
Right. No. But it would still, if the other 13 had sent delegations, it would be significant, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, these don't have any binding authority any more than the Council of Florence has binding authority because all of them but one agreed to it. So
no, and that's
So again, it's like this seems like a Roman Catholic approach. Like, what if we get 80% of leaders or 75% of leaders, and they agree on a position? Won't you admit that you're wrong? I mean, no, it's a decentralized church. What matters is what's true, not fallacy of 80% of the bishops agree with it. I mean, in the Arian crisis, probably 80 to 90% were Arian. Does that make Arianism true?
Right, and I wasn't actually. I wouldn't want to go in that direction with it, Jay.
So what's the argument, man? I'm not trying to be mean, but get what? So you're talking about Ravina, okay? What's the Ravina argument that you want to get to?
So maybe I should have clarified from the beginning. I'm not necessarily making an argument. As always, I'm just not as always.
Okay.
I've only talked to you once.
What's the question?
So I think what the delegates tentatively agreed on was that there, even in the Orthodox view, there is a level of universal primacy. Now, of course, what that primacy entails would be radically different between the two views. And I think I mentioned last time that I am not I'm not a fan of the interpretation or implementation of Vatican I. For you, it would just be Vatican I as such. I would have to say implementation and interpretation.
Okay, but again, I don't think you have that luxury as a Roman Catholic to do that. So,
right.
So
right.
Again, this is like the same. I'm not trying to be mean, but how is this different than the conversation that we had last time? Like nothing that I wouldn't have any different replies than last time.
Well, in this case specifically, what would you say to the delegates agreeing to there being some level of universal primacy? Would you say there's any weight to that statement? Would you totally disagree? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, it contradicts Chieti and Alexandria, which says that he did not have or exercise universal jurisdiction or primacy. So if again, do we mean like first in canonical status? I mean, that could mean a lot of things. That could mean that like in a jurisdiction, the Patriarch of Constantinople has canonical privileges in his jurisdiction. It might mean that at an ecumenical council, there might be privileges that the Roman See has that are unique to the Roman See. But if you look at Canon 6 of Nicaea, when it says that Rome is first, it doesn't say anything about Peter. It doesn't say anything about a special charism. It appeals to custom and canonical tradition. It does not appeal to divine tradition.
Okay, I follow you. Maybe we can skip to Florence for just a second. I believe, and I know that doesn't. I'm not trying to say that Florence is valid or should be for the Orthodox, but let's say the Orthodox at that council agreed that the Bishop of Rome, if the reunification were implemented, he would enjoy his previous privileges prior to the schism. So, do you think that the Bishop of Rome had any, let's say, privileges that operated on the level of universal primacy, like settling disputes for the universal church or so?
Well, I mean, if you're going to use Sardica, that's already been addressed many times, that there was an appellate structure of appealing jurisdictional disputes and questions, but that wasn't just Rome. That also existed for Alexandria and other patriarchates. Anybody could appeal and try to get the powerful patriarchates on their side. And if Rome was the first see, then certainly many church fathers did seek to get the Roman See on their side. I mean, famously, St. Maximus did this, right? He tried to get Pope Martin to side with him against the Monothelites. And that's a very powerful thing to get the Roman See to do that. But again, that's all, it's because, as Maximus himself says, because the Roman See was Orthodox, not just because it's the Roman See. The Roman See had the reputation of upholding orthodoxy for many centuries, even though it had at times faltered already. So yeah, of course, it's natural to do that, to seek within an appellate structure, but that doesn't in any way signify the Vatican I claims. So I don't see what you're trying to prove. It's like you're trying to prove some sort of uniatism position that's not Vatican I and it's not orthodoxy. It's this other third thing that we need to go to have unification or something like that. And the point is that, no. The Roman Catholic system, the way it's structured as a system, if Vatican I is wrong, there's not a new third position. It means orthodoxy was correct.
No, I follow your logic there, Jay. I do. So in the appellate structure, would you say that Constantinople and Alexandria, for example, had just as much weight? And this is not a gotcha. I'm genuinely I just genuinely want your opinion. Would you say that Constantinople and Alexandria enjoyed the same level of primacy as Rome for appeal?
So who does Gregory the Great say is the Petrine sees?
Well, you'll have to tell me, guys.
Right, well, it's not Constantinople because Constantinople's not a Petrine see, right? It's Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, right? Are the three Petrine sees. So even in his day, they're recognized as all three the See of Peter because they descend from Peter. So Constantinople is said to have the second place at the Council of Constantinople I, and that's accepted in the East, but it's not accepted by Rome. But when Leo does not accept Canon 28, which is based on the canon from Constantinople I, elevating Constantinople, it has nothing to do with Peter claims. It has to do with Leo saying that it's not fair to the structure that was laid down in Canon 6 of Nicaea. So in other words, it would displace Alexandria, and Alexandria should not be put behind Constantinople. However, centuries later, that eventually gets accepted, and Constantinople is given the second place after Rome. So eventually, Canon 28, which is disputed, is accepted by Rome. So the point is that this is a movable, changeable structure, and I think it's was useful, particularly when there was a unified church. But when the West split, at that point, obviously the appellate structure is not really relevant anymore. I'm not saying it couldn't be if there was a conversion. Let's say that the Roman Church in the future, I don't know, repented and became Orthodox, something like that, right? Like, would there be a return of the canons of Sardica, which, by the way, are not the approach of the canons of Sardica is not. It's still conciliar if you look at the way they argue in the canons. It's not Vatican I. Yeah, I mean, there could be some kind of structure like that where there's a return to an appellate structure. But, I mean, as Ubi pointed out in many of his debates, the appellate structure of Sardica is not Vatican I.
No, and I would agree with that. Okay, I follow you there. So I want to ask you about maybe some ecclesiology, and feel free to tell me to screw off whenever, because I don't want to take too much of people's time. But in the Orthodox view, and this may be a really stupid question, but in the Orthodox view, do all bishops have equal authority, or are there degrees?
So as I just said, in certain jurisdictions, the patriarchate, this is not anything to do with the Pope, in the history of the ecumenical councils, the patriarchs had canonical privileges. That means privileges within their jurisdiction and within councils. So the Roman See would have, if he were Orthodox, he would have patriarchal canonical privileges. For example, in the popes didn't call the councils, right? The emperors called the councils. And usually when the councils are signed off, they're signed off by the Roman See because the Roman See was the first. And we would say it's the first among equals. So they're given a kind of an honorary privilege, a canonical privilege. But canonical and honorary privileges are given, in my view, as I understand it, via the council. That's the argumentation of Canon 6 of Nicaea. And when you look at the canons in every one of the ecumenical councils, you do not see anybody arguing for a specific divine Petrine charism that's unique or in any way excludes Rome from the jurisdiction and the rule of the canons themselves. Rome is seen to be as defined and ruled by the canons, just like every other see is. They don't supersede it, but then that's why you get after the Gregorian reforms, you get this change, you get the revolution where it said no one can judge the Roman See now, right? Dictatus Papae, no one judges the first See. Well, prior to that, obviously people could judge the first See, which is why Honorius can be condemned as a heretic by the Sixth Council and by 3 succeeding councils, restating that condemnation, right? So the privileges are canonical jurisdictional privileges, much like the way the Bishop of Constantinople, for example, has canonical privileges, right? The Patriarch of Constantinople has canonical privileges. But the canonical privileges still don't translate into anything like papal privileges or the papal claims via Dictatus Papae, Unum Sanctum, and Vatican I.
Right. So, and again, anything I ask is because of my genuine ignorance.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm not with none of these questions, Jay. I'm not trying to get a gotcha. I'm much
It's
too
okay. Go ahead.
smart. So with the current issue with Moscow and Constantinople, how does the Orthodox Church determine, if it comes to this point, how would the Orthodox Church determine which see is in schism?
Right. Well, so it may not be immediately apparent in history which one is which, and this is common in church history, right? I mean, not common in the sense that it's everywhere, but there have been many cases where there were schisms between one patriarchate and another patriarchate, right? So that's something that's happened, and it's happened in the West as well. So it's not something that's like only in Orthodoxy or in the East or something like that. But so there's not an easy answer as to how it would turn out if Moscow did excommunicate Constantinople. But it would also depend, I think, on what the other patriarchates do, who they side with. There could be a giant schism down the middle of the Orthodox Church, again, which has happened in the past. So I think that time would eventually determine who was correct if it's a jurisdictional dispute. But if it's a theological dispute, I think it's a little more, it's more self-evident. So depending on how that controversy shapes up, like I could see, for example, the Patriarch of Moscow excommunicating eventually, let's say, Bartholomew. Bartholomew would then try to get everybody under the sway of the West on his side, and then he would probably get a few of the patriarchates on his side. And so we would either have a schism that basically split the church, and then that group goes back to Rome, which I think would be actually make everything very clear for everybody who was Orthodox and who wasn't. Because, of course, Bartholomew has expressed many times his desire to go back to Rome. Or you could have a schism that lasts for a period of time, such as we recently saw, I think, in Bulgaria, where that schism was recently healed. So there's a schism for 50, 60 years in the Orthodox Church between different autocephalous groups. And then that schism was just recently healed. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that?
I actually, no, I haven't, Jay.
Yeah, so there was a schism that was healed that had lasted for many decades, healed, I think, last year. So, in other words, conceivably, it could progress in that way. But given that, I think, Constantinople is pretty much totally subservient to the State Department. That wouldn't happen anytime soon, I don't think.
So if Kirill was to excommunicate Bartholomew, wouldn't he be acting in a way that is sort of inherently anathema to the Orthodox view?
No, it wouldn't be unilateral. It would be within his synod, and then it would be other synods would also go along with that. So in other words, probably the, let's say, best case scenario, if that happened, let's say Serbian, Antiochian side with him as well. So those jurisdictions and those synods would also probably agree. I'm just hypothetically speaking here.
Yeah.
And then you might have other jurisdictions. Maybe the Greeks are split. Some of the bishops agree, and then some of the bishops in the synod side with America and the whatever. So, I mean, it would probably literally split the Orthodox Church right down the middle, which is probably what they're going for. In the same way that Francis seems to be kind of splitting the Roman Catholic Church in the middle.
So in that scenario, would Orthodoxy be sort of contingent, or at least Orthodoxy? I know that Orthodoxy is sort of eternal, ephemeral. But at least from a visible standpoint, would it sort of be the majority? It wins. The majority is the Orthodox. Whichever side.
Again, that's a papal attitude that Catholicity is determined by numbers. So, I mean, was the Catholic Church determined by the majority of the Arian bishops in the Arian crisis?
No.
Right. So what does Maximus say? Maximus says that if the true Catholics are reduced to a small band, I will be amongst the true Catholics. So again, for St. Maximus, Catholicity was not a numbers game.
Right. So what you're saying is it would just have to be borne out by history, and we would probably not see the resolution of who the Orthodox really were in that context.
I think that people who are correct will know who's Orthodox. I don't think that. I mean, it seems like you have like a Roman Catholic. I'm not trying to diss you, but it seems like a Roman Catholic attitude that nobody can know until like the papal figure tells us what's true and who's right. And I don't think that's true.
I'm just looking for a principle. It wouldn't have to be the Pope. I'm just looking for a principle by which we could know.
Well, again, depending upon whether it's a jurisdictional dispute, which would probably be harder to figure out because that would be principally about canons and interpreting canon law, versus something that's more directly theological. Like, let's say, for example, Bartholomew says, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Like, let's say next year there's an excommunication of Bartholomew by Kirill, and then a bunch of other synods and patriarchs and bishops follow along with that, and they agree. And then the response of Bartholomew and other American-aligned bishops is to say, no, we're right. And then let's say Bartholomew says, and by the way, now is the perfect time to show our unity and our strength. We must join together with Pope Francis and provide a unified Christianity, blah, 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 right? Let's say that happened. Like, at that point, it would become more clearly a theological and, by the way, geopolitical movement rather than just a jurisdictional or canonical dispute. So it really depends on where things go and what the dispute ends up being about, because I will grant you that it's harder, I guess, for laity to try to figure out if there's a jurisdictional dispute, which might be, relying on people determining different canons or this and that, versus something that's more outright theological. Because in the Orthodox Church, we think that the Holy Spirit is present at a local level to the extent that everybody in the mystical body has the same Spirit, the same presence of Christ as a bishop does or as a patriarch does. So they might have canonical privileges and so forth, but we don't have this early medieval idea of a difference between the mystical body, the juridical body, and then the lower lay people. That's all a Roman Catholic type of idea. So no, I think in our view, the Orthodox Church is that the laity have just as much a say-so as anybody else. They don't have the authority, but they have as much say-so, which is why they have in many cases led the charge against heresy when the bishops failed. You could have the exact same scenario, like in the the iconoclast crisis was largely monastics and laity who were leading the charge against corrupt bishops and patriarchs. So, so I think, again, it just really depends on how things go, but none of that really has anything to do with which one's the true church, because that's going to be decided via the theological issues and whether the Roman Catholic Church, it's either Roman Catholic Church or Orthodoxy, I would say, right? Or not. You don't think so?
What's your question? I'm sorry, Jay.
So that my reply was, if it's a canonical jurisdictional dispute, that might be hard for laity to figure out. If it becomes more explicitly a theological issue and a push to accept the Filioque or some version of it, and all the other Roman Catholic doctrines, including the papacy in some way, then it will be easier for Orthodox people to say, okay, we know that's not right. Okay.
Yes, I follow you completely on that.
So again, I don't know what direction and how this will shake out in the next few years, but I can't see Bartholomew going against his handlers anytime soon.
Yeah, and feel free to decline this hypothetical. So let's just say it was a canonical dispute, and Kirill feels compelled to execute Bartholomew on the basis of a canonical dispute, and Bartholomew does not go back to Rome. Is there, and then that the sort of I'm on this side, they're on that side mentalities, it starts to burgeon within Orthodoxy. Am I going to side with Moscow? Am I going to side with Constantinople? And you get that situation. God forbid, I don't want that to happen. But if it were a canonical dispute and you had this sort of avalanche effect on the basis of a canonical dispute, and there wasn't an obvious theological rift here, would there be an immediate principle by which we could know which is the Orthodox Church, or would we have to wait for history to sort the issue out?
That's a difficult question, because I think we could probably look back to situations in church history where there have been these types of schisms. And if you're wondering if the papacy would somehow magically solve that, I just don't think it does. I think if that was the case, then we would have appealed to the papacy to decide all these things in the first 1,000 years.
Right. So, okay, and I'll follow you on that. I appreciate appreciate again the Orthodox.
So again, the Orthodox Church is local and synodal. It's not judged by or governed by Constantinople or the big guy, the big kahuna.
No, yeah, absolutely.
So most Orthodox people are going to go along with whatever their local synod does, and if their local synod goes in a certain direction that, this is already kind of happening. We already have people kind of leaving various jurisdictions that are more and more moving in the direction of, Constantinople. That's been happening for the last several years, and that a lot of those people are coming over to our direction. But again, the key sign here is that one commonality is that many of the people that are going in the other direction towards Constantinople, or they stay in those, say, in the Go-Art circles and whatnot, a lot of those, not everybody, but a lot of those people are pretty open about their desire to reunite with Rome. So that just helps make things clearer for people.
Right, and I follow you there. Last hypothetical, and this one's just sort of, this is out there, but let's say in some alternate universe, I were the Pope, and I wanted to call a new council and reinterpret Vatican I in favor of an Orthodox understanding, and I were to somehow pull that off. Would you? I guess. Would you? As an
I think
Orthodox
that's. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean. I think that's ludicrous from the outset, because it's not just Vatican I. I mean, you've got the Council of Lyons, you've got Dictatus Papae, you've got Florence, you've got. I mean, it's not just. Vatican I is just the easy one to go to because it's just so clear with what the doctrine of the papacy is. So, but it's not like there aren't all these other dogmatic councils as well. I mean, Trent, for example, Trent says you have to believe that, what you partake of is not the thing that God has. And I don't see how any Orthodox person could believe that the grace of justification that we get in baptism is not the uncreated life of God. And that's what Trent says.
Yeah, and on that point, I'm definitely I've got so much responsibility in my life, but I'm working towards. Since you've said that, it makes me want to read the canons of Trent even more, because I would that would be totally foreign to my conception of participation in the divine life. I don't know if you are familiar at all with Saint John of the Cross. He was the Carmelite.
I'm very familiar. I was a Roman Catholic and a trad cat for many years.
Okay, cool. So St. John was really formative for my spiritual life when I began sort of moving towards Roman Catholicism out of Protestantism. And I know this is not an argument, but based on the sort of the way I began to conceptualize the faith based on reading St. John, I would never have gotten that kind of sense that Trent gives, that we don't have an actual participation in the divine energies of the divine life. What would you say?
Well, and I have Divine Intimacy up there, which was my devotional that I used for many years as a Roman Catholic, and it includes hundreds of pages, I think. If I'm going from memory, I haven't looked at it in probably 15 years, but it has many, many pages of quotes from John of the Cross. So I'm very familiar with this idea of Roman Catholic mystical union and, the dark night of the soul and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't really exist in Orthodoxy. We don't have the same ideas of this dark night of the soul and so forth. I'm not saying there aren't some parallels, because I know that what's stressed in that very devotional book, Divine Intimacy, is participation in the divine life. But really the point here is not, do Roman Catholics at times say correct things, or do they at times say that we participate in theosis or something like that, but rather that there's contradictions in the dogmatic statements. That's a different argument.
Yeah, okay, I follow you. So you would say that saints in the Catholic Church sometimes have genuine spiritual intuitions based on their, and so.
Well, hold on. Let me be clear. I don't know. I'm not gonna say that I know that they have genuine spiritual experiences, because for the Orthodox, I don't comment. I don't know who. I would say that if you're having, spirits carve things into your chest about, or Jesus handing you a foreskin ring, those are not valid spiritual experiences.
No, but more in line with St. John, a very kind of not sensational, not charismatic revelation. But
let me put it this way. Again, I'm not. So the fact that John of the Cross says at times we participate in the divine life, that proposition is true. But what he thinks about that, or what that might mean to a Roman Catholic, is very different from, in the Orthodox view, there's not like this myriad of mystical experiences that goes on. So you're not going to have like, oh, this guy over here gets the stigmata. This woman over here talks to the floating host where Jesus is her boyfriend. This woman over here throws herself down a well, and this guy over here, or this woman over here, gets a foreskin ring from Jesus. This other woman gets Jesus carving things into her chest like he's a serial killer. You don't get that. You get one idea of every saint, whether it's Moses, Paul, Basil, or Palamas, has the exact same experience of purification, illumination, deification. So everybody has the same experience, and it's the Mosaic experience. It's what Nyssa says about. It's what the Cappadocians talk about. So it's different. It is not the same thing as all of these vast sort of wild histrionics of Roman Catholic women and all this madness and nonsense.
Well, and that's not what I would want to make reference to, certainly not in talking about St. John of the Cross, who I think is, on the basis of his own testimony, is a very kind of orthodox spirituality, at least as far as I can tell.
But again, I'm not trying to be mean to you, but that is not the Orthodox account of spirituality. It's just not. So that there might be some overlap does not make John of the Cross an Orthodox figure. And again, I haven't read John of the Cross in probably 15 years, so I can't speak to specifics. I don't remember all the details of, but I do remember that devotional talking a lot about the divine life and living and participating in divine love and divine life. And those propositions are true, but that doesn't mean that Roman Catholics, let's say imaginative prayer, that a lot of Roman Catholic mysticism promotes. That's not an Orthodox idea. We don't do imaginative prayer.
No, but just in reference specifically to St. John, I think you mentioned Dark Night of the Soul, which to me it heavily has to do with apophaticism or the via negativa.
But Thomas Aquinas talks about this, but it's not the same thing as, just because that people talk about the same thing does not mean that it's the same experience. And I'm telling you from being Roman Catholic for a long time and then being Orthodox for a good while now, it's very different. It's not the same.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with the word concept fallacy, and I guess I won't go further into that because I would need to read Anthony of the Desert, and I have Life of Moses from Gregory of Nyssa. But John of the Cross also talks a lot about Moses and going up into the cloud, and it's very
that's because the cloud of unknowing. A lot of these. I don't know if he was influenced by that, but there were a lot of Roman Catholic mystics that were influenced by Neoplatonism. I mean, Thomas Aquinas is influenced by Neoplatonism. So, but that's not the same thing as what we're talking about in Orthodox. Just because we have apophatic things in common, it doesn't follow from that you have the same idea between these two systems. I mean, again, Roman Catholic mysticism and piety is bound up with a host of things that no Orthodox person could ever accept. And it's inextricably bound up with those things now. The further you get up into present day church history, the more it's all sort of bound up together in those things. So, for example, you couldn't separate, I don't know, Marian piety from the Immaculate Conception and the definition of the Immaculate Conception, and the various Roman Catholic women saints who've had their experiences of Mary and all that. Like, all of that kind of is a package deal, right? Because it wouldn't make sense for me to say, well, I doubt a lot of those Roman Catholic mystic women's visions of Mary and the apparitions and all that, but I still believe in, the definition of the Immaculate Conception. It would be inconsistent. So in other words, as we progress and as Roman Catholic theology evolves, you get more and more of these manifestations that, again, kind of all go together. So I just don't really see, other than I remember being at a position like you're at where I thought, well, I'm doubting Roman Catholicism. Maybe I can read some of these mystical treatises. I remember reading Divine Intimacy and thinking, well, this sounds like what a lot of the Orthodox saints are talking about. But again, it's a question of, does the Roman Catholic Church possess the medicine to actually heal people. And I don't think that it does.
I follow you. Would you at least say that between the concepts of divinization and theosis, via negativa and apophaticism, would you say there's at least an actual comparison to be made there, and not just a mere conceptual comparison?
What do you mean?
Like, I guess it could be related to the word concept fallacy, in that, just because two words are sound the same, if they don't make reference to the same concept or the same idea. But I guess so when St. John is talking about his experience of divine union, and he's trying to put this in a theological framework for people to understand in a conceptual way, is he experiencing something that is real? Is it
I don't know. It's not my place. I'm not going to judge individuals. But what I do know is that if you do have those experiences, then what I expect is the correct theology to go along with it. So it's like, it's kind of a both and not an either or, right? So is it possible that, in God's account of things, he can stand before God and God can see that his heart was right? And I don't know. I can't judge people outside. Paul says we don't judge those outside. But I know that there's not going to be experiences of the divine light that contradict the Orthodox teaching of how that divine light's experienced.
Right. So you would say you don't know if there's any real correspondence between St. John's concept of divine union and theosis. There might be, but there's no way to adjudicate that.
I don't know what his experience was other than what he relates in the books, and I'm not going to grant that's a true path to God, and so is stigmata of Francis of Assisi. I mean, everybody who knows and understands Orthodox piety and life would look at the life of Saint Francis and say that this is very different from the life of Gregory Palamas. And whatever you think is true or false, like, those are two different things, right? So they're not the same thing. They're not the same experience. One of them is right. One of them is wrong. So maybe Roman Catholicism is right? Okay, then it's going to disqualify the experiences of God outside of the Roman Catholic Church, unless you're like a Vatican II ecumenist, right?
Yeah, guilty as charged.
You mean you're a Vatican II ecumenist?
Well, no, because I wouldn't want to have ecumenism with Jews or Muslims or Protestants. Maybe Anglican if they were more conservative and they were willing to, concede sort of the claims of Catholicism and also of Orthodoxy, because obviously there's overlap.
Okay, but you understand that the basis is the same, because if we're talking about the same God, because the terms are the same, then the same goes for natural theology, a la Nostra Aetate and Vatican II.
All I can say is that if there are Catholics who are still committed to the project, which they are, committed to the project of ecumenism with Jews and Muslims.
Okay, but the project of ecumenism is based on Roman Catholicism's doctrine of natural theology, a la Nostra Aetate, and everything from John Paul II to Thomas Aquinas, and their writings on it.
Yeah, I know. Last time we were able to briefly discuss the fact.
Well, you asked me a whole bunch of questions, so now I'm asking you that question.
Yeah,
is that not true? Is that not the case?
No, I think you're right. But I would say that natural theology is a valid move to make. I wouldn't take it.
Okay, so why is it wrong to then say that when a Muslim calls upon God, it's the same God as when a Christian calls upon God, because it's the Abrahamic faith, because that's what Nostra Aetate and Vatican II documents say. So why is it an invalid move? It's just consistent natural theology.
So just like you say, Jay, I can't judge people's hearts. I can't judge people's internal.
We're not judging hearts. We're judging the theological public statements.
But you were making reference to a Muslim somewhere, just a hypothetical Muslim.
No, I'm talking about Nostra Aetate.
I've read, now is where you'll have to school me on my own theology, because I've read Lumen Gentium, I've read De Verbum, I've read Sacrosanctum.
Okay, you haven't read the 5-page most important one on on the very thing we're talking about?
Yeah, I have to admit I haven't read Nostra Aetate.
Okay. Well, you should read that because it's the one that points out what I'm talking about. So Muslim, but I mean, Benedict says this in his books. I mean, it shouldn't be that far from. Come on, man, you know this. The basis for what's the basis for building the Abu Dhabi Faith Center?
No, it's awful. Yeah,
what's the basis for it? I'm not asking what you like it or not. What's the basis?
Well, you're going to say that the basis is natural theology, I would assume.
I don't say that. Your popes say that. What are you talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, if Benedict made some statement that Aquinas, like the natural theology of Aquinas,
what do you think natural theology is? Maybe we have a different idea of what we're talking about.
Natural theology is reasoning from created things to God.
More specifically, that's part of it. But what is it defined everywhere as? It's not just from creatures, because everybody could say we reason for creatures to God. What's the specific definition as to what it is? This is Fides et Ratio, John Paul II's definition. This is William Lane Craig's definition. It's all the same. What is it?
I guess you could say
it's reasoning about God without any reference to divine revelation. So specifically reasoning about God without divine revelation is the definition of natural theology. So the basis then of Thomas Aquinas' natural theology, whereby in Summa Contra Gentiles, Book 1, he argues that Aristotle and all the classical theists are arguing for the same generic God. Is that natural theology? Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair, yeah.
Okay, so classical theism is the expression of natural theology, whereby, according to, say, Dr. Ed Fazer, classical theism is the God of Aristotle, Averroes, Aquinas, Plotinus, and Augustine to express the unity and absolute simplicity of God and the being the first mover.
Yeah, and I wouldn't agree with certain ideas about absolute simplicity. So
wait a minute, but that's classical theism. So
I could agree insofar as they say, well, God is not composed of parts, and then I would go to agree with you that distinctions.
But we're talking about just how they generically define what classical theism is. So you disagree with Fazer, who is a typical common Catholic expresser of natural theology.
What do you think I disagree with him about?
Well, he just said the God of Averroes, Aquinas, Augustine, Plotinus, Aristotle, Averroes, Muslim.
So thank you for pronouncing his name, because I never knew how. I think that these various people can reason from creatures or without.
But that's not what's in question. The question is, are we having the same referent when we refer to the one God? Because the basis of Vatican II's ecumenism via its documents, expressed by people like John Paul II and many other Roman Catholic theologians, is that we are calling upon the same Unitarian God, because Abraham worshipped a Unitarian God, Jews believe in a Unitarian God, and Muslims believe in a Unitarian God. So therefore, we're all worshiping the same Unitarian God. Let me ask, is that how almost all Roman Catholics argue their natural theology? Is it?
I'm sure a lot of them do, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, who doesn't? Name one that doesn't.
Yeah, I might not be able to.
Okay, well, there's not any that I'm aware of. I've never heard of one, because it would be denying their basic anthropology and their natural theology. I mean, classical theism is bound up with natural theology. So you're disagreeing with, again, things that are pretty standard Roman Catholic theology.
Well, and again, I would agree that it's that natural theology is a valid move. I would just, there are details about where you go with that.
Okay, how is it a valid move when it's doing the very things that I'm talking about?
Well, you don't have to build an Abu Dhabi center just because you recognize that Muslims can pray to God. Like, somebody who has no...
let's make it very simple. Do Muslims and Jews also share the same Abrahamic God as we do? That's the argument. That's the basis for it.
Muslims refer to, and I've listened to your debates with Muslims, which they're very. I love those debates. By the way.
Hold on, but the key here is, what's the Abrahamic God? Is it a Unitarian God?
So, but let me.
No, what do you mean? But is it or it? What's the Abrahamic God? It's either the triad, which every Orthodox person knows from the meal with Abraham icon,
right?
Or it's a generic Unitarian deity of natural theology. So did Abraham worship the Trinity? Did he know Jesus? Or was he worshiping, as Trent Horn says, expressing natural theology, a generic Unitarian God?
So I agree with the triad, but...
no, that's not the question. Why are you being evasive? What did Abraham know and worship? I didn't ask you if you believe in the Trinity. What did Abraham know and worship? What does Jesus say Abraham knew and worshipped?
Hold on, Jay. Let me propose something to you.
No, you keep answering with these hypotheticals. So you asked me about 50 questions. I answered all your questions about ecclesiology and canons. Why won't you answer these natural theology questions? Why are you being evasive?
I think so. God is who he is in his own nature.
That's not. Come on. We didn't ask you that. You're being evasive. You're being sophistical. Who did Abraham worship? Did Abraham know that he was worshiping Jesus?
I don't know whether or not he had a concept of the Logos. I can't answer that question.
How does Jesus answer that? Have you read the Gospels? How does Jesus answer that? Abraham saw my day. He worshiped me. Who did Jesus have a meal with? Abraham. Have you read Genesis?
No, I agree with that.
And so you're saying that Abraham didn't know Jesus, even though Jesus says in the book of John that Abraham knew him. You see where the natural theology leads you? It leads you to this stupid stuff. I'm not being mean to you. I'm not saying you're stupid. This idea is stupid. And it's so fundamentally contrary to everything that Christianity argues, that Abraham worshiped the triad, had a meal with Jesus, that every Orthodox person knows by looking at that icon. That icon shows us that it's Jesus that he's having a meal with. It's Jesus eating with Moses when Moses goes up on the mountain and he has the meal. Everybody knows that. And yet, Roman Catholics have to sit here and tell us, like they're Muslims or Jews, no, Abraham maybe didn't know it. It was a generic Unitarian God. How do you have a meal with a generic Unitarian God? You understand the theology denies the theophanies.
Okay, so I want to respond to you, Jay. I think Abraham had, like a vital, direct experience of God that most of us have no...
There's no such thing as a generic experience of God. It was the it's the face...
Hold on, Jay.
It's not generic. It's explained in the New Testament for you. He says, Paul. Who does Paul say Moses saw face to face? Generic essence? Did he see generic essence, or did he see Jesus face to face?
Jay.
Don't say my name. I'm asking you a question. Who does Paul say in 2 Corinthians 3? Who did Moses see?
But okay.
Who did Moses see? Can you answer this question and stop evading? Don't say my name and say I'm being mean to you. What does 2 Corinthians 3? What does 2 Corinthians 3 say? You don't know? Do you want me to pull it up? Who did Moses see on the mountain? Is it a mystery? I wonder who. When Moses went up on the mountain, when his face was shining, do you remember who does Paul say he saw?
Yes, the Logos. I agree.
No,
with you, Jay.
Jesus. So it's not, they didn't know it's Jesus in the Old Testament. They thought it was the Logos is Jesus, right?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Therefore, natural theology and Nostra Aetate are wrong.
So, and
I mean, the thing that you're having to prop up this entire time shows the point. Just like the debate with Trent, you're doing the exact same thing Trent had to try to do: make Moses and Abraham into Unitarians.
No, well, that's not what I want to do.
Right, because it's contrary to what's obvious to all of us as Christians, that they're Trinitarians in an implicit way. They don't have to have the Nicene definition of the Trinity to know that there's Yahweh who sends his angel, the Lord, and his Spirit.
Right, and what I'm saying is that the experience that Abraham had transcends our manner of conceptualizing his direct experience of God.
Well, however it transcends or doesn't transcend, we know that the New Testament identifies Abraham as believing in Jesus.
Right, this is
so it's not Unitarianism a la natural theology. And you understand that many of the apologists for natural theology have consistently argued, like Aquinas did, that the Old Testament teaches a generic Unitarian God, and then the New Testament teaches a new revelation of Jesus' divinity and Trinity. Okay, but if what I'm saying is correct, that's wrong.
Jay, I agree with you. The Trinity.
Well, then you don't believe in Vatican II and Nostra Aetate.
So, and again, you can kick me off anytime you want. I'm not trying to make you mad.
Now it sounds like to me like you want me to kick you off, so I look like a bad guy.
No. Because I think I might be bothering you at this point. Is the only thing.
Everybody knows I get heated in debates. I'm not mad or bothered by you.
Okay. So, whenever you debate Muslims and you say that the triad is revealed in the Old Testament, all of that is excellent. And the only thing I'm saying is,
But that also refutes what you guys argue. That refutes Thomism and natural theology. Because that's premised on the Old Testament not teaching a triad, but teaching a generic unity, which we can all get behind.
What I'm wondering is, in your view, is it possible for somebody who's never been exposed to the Christian revelation, is it possible for a person like that to have some interaction with God within their own
How does that relate to that? What does that have to do with this?
Well, I think it does have to do with it.
Okay, how? But what? What does that have to do with this?
It has to do with the claim of natural theology in specific, because natural theology is making reference, is saying, as people who have the use of reason and access to the created world, who can reason from created things to God, this is a process that many people would have gone through, many people necessarily would have to go through absent the Christian revelation, in order to have some access to the divine life, to have some...
Yeah, but you're missing the point, which is the great point that Losky makes, which is that you're just assuming that there's some kind of revelation of God that comes to us apart from the Trinity. Like, I can get to God as a generic essence, and then later on I can tack on deity of Christ or Trinity. And what we're saying is, no, it's the opposite. So anybody who has an extra normative, extraordinary revelation in this way, it would still be ultimately a triadic Christological revelation that they're getting. So I don't have a problem with saying that Christ can appear to people in his own unique way and introduce them to his mystical body in an extraordinary way. But that doesn't in any way prove natural theology. It has nothing to do with natural theology. That can just as easily fit into my model.
Well, no, and I'm not referring to extraordinary experience, but for most of us, the spiritual life is very subtle. It's very dry. It's there aren't visions and ecstasies that are attendant upon it. It's just very subtle intuitions, very subtle. We have a sense of God in prayer. It's like
what does this have to do with the question of natural theology?
Well, I'm getting there, and so what I'm saying is, people who have existed throughout history, absent the Christian revelation, have this is the sort of, I think people throughout history, this is their only way of access to God, is through a subtle experience within their own soul. It doesn't have to be ecstatic or visionary. It's just all I'm saying is that God, these people have had some access to the divine life, or else they couldn't. Their souls couldn't be...
yeah, but again, that doesn't prove natural theology. It has nothing to do with... I mean, I can fit that into my model because I'm saying that the only way into divine life is to be introduced to the divine persons that have that divine life, and that means that it's immediately triadic. There is no generic God that you have access to apart from Trinity. The only way that we know God is the way that the Creed announces God. I believe in God the Father Almighty. It doesn't say I believe in one generic natural theology essence that we all worship, and also this Trinity that I tack on top of that. It says I begin with,
agree.
so the monarchy of the Father is the only God that exists. And Jesus says that the only way to that Father is through him. So I could say very easily that, yeah, God can introduce himself to pagan people that have never heard the gospel, but it's still the personal triadic God. It's not an absolutely simple essence that these people reasoned up to through.
Yes. Well, this is where we're getting to a good part, Jay. I think where it's a part of substance here, because I agree with you here, but these people, these pagans, they're not, most of them are not getting revelation where there's a concept that enters their mind where they know that the truth of the triadic God, or there's not a vision.
No, but I'm saying that before they're entered into the presence of God, they are at some point shown that. So if it's on their deathbed and they're shown that, that's possible. But no, I don't think they're coming to the Trinity from staring at rocks and trees. No.
No, but up to that point, they can still have some experience of God, absent any visionary experience of the Trinity or absent any concept of the Trinity. They can still have, while they're
but you're missing the point that in Orthodox theology, conceptualizing about God from the created order is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is not itself the experience of God. God is not a created concept or thing.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. And this is, I think...
Okay, so then you're admitting my point that when they do begin to have the experience of God himself, the only way to have that experience is if it's triadic.
Yes, that direct, like, vital experience, sort of mystical experience, if you want, yes, it would be triadic. But prior to that point, which most people are nowhere near that point, I know I'm not, and we're speaking about pagans who have no access to divine revelation. What they're going on is a kind of nominal interaction with God in their own souls. They're reasoning from created things to a God.
And none of that is the experience of God.
Right, but it's still, God is still communicating with them. He's still moving in their lives.
Yeah, but God is communicating at that level with everybody, even atheists.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so by that argument, atheists are also directly experiencing God. They're not.
No, I'm not saying it's a direct experience of God, but based on this personal trajectory of
okay, so
reason.
but the point is that that's good and well, but that's not the experience of God. And the only way to have the divine life is to experience God. So you're confusing again created categories with the divine life.
All I'm saying is that people who are working up to the experience of God on that nominal basis, and I'm not any kind of reference to nominalism, obviously, but on that nominal basis, people reasoning to God prior to that experience, I think those reasonings are on some level valid. You know, they're receiving intuitions from God.
Yeah, but that's still not natural theology.
Well, how is it not?
Because the created concepts are still pointing us to the uncreated. So if we never get past the created concepts, it's not really doing us any good. Now, we don't know from God's vantage point when he's interacting with and how he's interacting with those people in their hearts and their nous. We don't know that. I can't see that. So can I say that God hasn't in some way introduced himself to a pagan who, died without hearing the gospel? I don't know that. It's possible that God can do that. But I'm not told that. But what I am told is that the only way to be saved is to be joined to the mystical body and to know God personally. And so if God has extraordinary means by which he does that, he can do that. But that doesn't mean that I grant that there's all this natural because all the other stuff goes along with it, right? Natural theology is a package deal with all this other stuff that we're talking about. It's not a thing where you get to pick and choose and say, well, I don't agree with the classical theism side of natural theology, and I don't like the Muslims being able to do it. And because everything that you just said would apply in the Vatican II natural theology argumentation, even more so to the Muslim. The Muslim is arguing better than the pagan is in the Vatican II mindset. So what you're saying contradicts when you earlier said that I don't want Muslims to be a part of this equation here. But pagans are, but not Muslims?
Well, not pagans who, I'm referencing people who, people in history who had no access to the gospel. Obviously, God is going to judge.
Yeah, but you said earlier that Muslims are not part of this equation.
I don't think they should be part of the Christian, in the context of Christian ecumenism. No, I don't think they should be part of that.
But you don't understand that it's the same basis of generic theism? The same generic God. Let me give an example. So in Nostra Aetate, it says that Hindus
call upon, quote, God in love, right? And then it goes on to say, with the same terminology, Muslims also call upon God like Christians do. So the idea here is that Muslims, Hindus, Christians, everybody is calling upon the same, quote, God, right? And it even says Hindus have access to and love God. But do we? Right? That's the point. It's not the same God. So in order for that to be the case, it would have to be the same referent. Clearly, it's not the same referent, right? Between Muslims, Hindus, and Christians. So how do we make this thing work? And the whole thing is premised on the idea that there's a generic God that we all worship. Why? Because some things we have in common. So for example, if a Muslim believes in God's unity, I believe in God's unity. If a Hindu believes in some sort of absolute unity, well, then we're all calling on the same God because of these shared traits. But that's a fallacy. That's the quantifier shift fallacy, right? So let's make this into a really just clear logical argument. In the quantifier shift fallacy, the argument goes, I have one mother, you have one mother, Bob has one mother, we all have one mother, therefore we have the same mother. That's the quantifier shift fallacy. So how is natural theology not the quantifier shift fallacy? Just to make this very clear.
It's a difficult question. I would want to say, and come down hard on me for any fallacies, but I would want to say that because the Muslim has some partial concept of God,
But the Hindu does too.
Yeah, and Jay, that's something I could talk about more extensively because I haven't read the Quran, but I've read a lot of the Vedantic literature, and some of that is really interesting. Although it can, for an ill-trained.
So what now? So now Hindus are higher on the scale, closer to us than the Muslims are. What's the point of that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I shouldn't even go there. I haven't read the Quran, but I definitely find some of the Vedantic literature to be at least interesting, and I don't really want to get into that though.
Okay, so back to the quantifier shift fallacy. So is natural theology quantifier shift fallacy or not? And if not, why?
So I can respond to you more clearly. Give me the example or the syllogism one more time.
I have one mother. You have one mother. Bob has one mother. Therefore, we all have the same mother.
Okay. So
Muslims believe in one God. Hindus believe in one God. Christians believe in one God. Therefore, we all believe in the same God.
Right. So obviously, there are attributes of God in excess of His unity that Muslims would hold in common with Christians.
Right. So the argument then assumes a lowest common denominator of attributes, that because we have 1, 2, 3 in common, then we're talking about the same referent, even though every one of us believes. Just take it, for example, Basil's arguments with, say, Eunomius. When Eunomius says, I believe in Father, Son, Holy Spirit, it's just not a Trinity, right? So we have the same application to Basil versus Eunomius as we could have with any of these analogies here. Does Basil think that he and Eunomius worship the same God?
No.
Okay, so if that's the case, you could say that Eunomius is basically like an Arian or a Muslim, how are we going to turn around and say that, well, in the case of the Muslim, the Hindu, the Christian, the Jew, we're all worshiping the same God?
So I wouldn't, with the concept of having the same referent, I see your point, and I wouldn't necessarily want to make that claim. The claim I would want to make is that if the Muslim or the Vedantic philosopher has some partial concept of God and His nature, and that leads him into a life of contemplation where he's maybe disposing himself more readily.
Okay, but you already said we don't know that, right? You already said you can't really judge that, right? So the fact that one individual guy, in your theory, can have this mystical experience, like, does that then mean that therefore all of the public religions and their public professions are therefore a valid path? Because that's the very argumentation of Nostra Aetate. And now the Catholic Church is no longer necessary because the Hindu also has a direct access to God.
Yeah, I would. And again, now I need to read Nostra Aetate because I didn't know the claims were so strong. But shoot, you're right. I can't know what is.
Yeah, and if you can't know, then it doesn't really function as a good argument for saying that these religions are all publicly professing the same deity. So, I mean, I can pull up Nostra Aetate here for you or for the audience. It's not very long. It's only like 5 pages, but
I remember. I've at least read the opening paragraph. I think it says something to the effect of many religions, though.
Well, I mean, it says the church esteems the Muslims. They adore the one God, living and subsisting in Himself, the Creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to men. Now, this is all like, again, ridiculously giving credence to the Quran, which is a ridiculous book. And then it says that Muslims take pains to submit to the God of Abraham, just as Abraham did. The whole thing here is premised on the idea being that we worship the same God as the Muslims. I just read paragraph 3 to you, right? Okay. Which is not true, because Jesus says very clearly, if you reject the Son, you don't have the Father. And Paul says very clearly that the only way to be Abraham's seed is in Christ. This document says Muslims are Abraham's seed. They're not. And then we go down and it says, I was going to read the Hindu quote. It says, religions that are bound up with an advanced culture have struggled to answer the same questions by means of refined concepts and developed language. Thus, in Hinduism, so we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about in the religion, men contemplate the divine mystery and express it through inexhaustible abundance of myths and through searching for philosophical inquiry. They seek freedom from the anguish of our human condition through ascetic practices and in profound meditation, a flight to God, capital G, our God. Likewise, Buddhism. Let's see. In its various forms, realizes radical insufficiency of the changeable world. It teaches that men in a devout and confident spirit can attain to perfect liberation, or by their own efforts, supreme illumination. Likewise, other religions, right, seek to counter the restlessness of their human heart, and each in their own ways, with sacred rites. And then it goes on to say that the Catholic Church rejects nothing in these religions that is true and holy. But you see that this ambiguity here has already kind of given way to the idea that, well, but they can have these direct mystical experiences even within Hinduism, which, again, the danger is that it's based on the natural theology that we're all calling upon the same God. The Hindu is not calling upon the true God in love. No Christian can say that. It doesn't say in spite of Hinduism. The text says in Hinduism, men do this. So again, I would agree that if the text said, you could maybe justify it by saying that if the text said something like, in Hinduism, men believe this, yet in spite of this, God can still reach these people or something like that. That's not what it says. It says in Hinduism, men contemplate divine mystery, express it in their myths, and they seek through their meditation a flight to capital G God with love and trust.
So would you make any distinction between this kind of theism based on superstition and the kind of theism which is maybe the philosophical product of a philosophical process, a reasoning through didactic methods? Would you see any distinction between that? Maybe like between the Hindu.
Right. I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm going to move on. We've talked for a long time. Maybe there's a distinction, but I mean, the document talks about advanced cultures versus, I guess, non-advanced. But no, I mean, this is getting way off into the weeds. It's not even staying on track. I'm not trying to be mean to you. Great conversation. Enjoyed your questions. Great heated discussions. Not mad at you, but I'm going to end it there just because it will never stop talking about Nostra Aetate and Vatican II. So here we got another trad cat. Well, that guy was not technically Tradcat, but go ahead, Tradcat. Unmute. Thought we were going to have a lot of atheists calling in, but we ended up getting more Catholics. And are you going to talk? Trad Catholic C. So this is the online Twitter C, right? The Apostolic C on Twitter here. Are you going to unmute? You've been sitting there waiting. Look at that, the Trad Catholic C. So if Roman Catholics, if you're a Trad and you're looking for an online episcopate to align yourself with, here's an online C, the online episcopate. And no, they're not going to say anything. So we're going to move on.